Hi, and welcome to this Ask the Expert session for Create Hybrid and Multi-Cloud Strategies with Microsoft Azure. My name is Chris Bohr. I'm a Director of Business Strategy here in the Global Partner Solutions Azure team. Now, this is an interactive session and we're looking forward to hearing from you. So please use the chat feature to ask your questions. We'll respond in the chat and we'll share some of them in this discussion too. I would like to note that the code of conduct is included at the top of the chat if you'd like to reference that, and be sure to rate this session. And if you provide commentary, please know we do read it all. We have a great panel of experts for this chat today, but to save time, I'm going to have them introduce themselves as we pass questions to them, okay? So while we're waiting for your questions to come in, I wanted to start off with this question to Lior. Which I hear quite a lot, Lior. What are the most common customer scenarios you're seeing in the wild on this topic?
Thank you, Chris. Good question to kick us off. And hi, everyone. Welcome to Inspire. And let me just introduce myself real quickly. My name is Lior Kamrat, and I'm a solution architect as part of our partners organization and also the author of the Jumpstart project, which we're going to talk about today, hopefully. And to kick us off, you know, Chris, the question around the use cases and what is it that we're seeing in the wild comes a lot, like you said. And the number one scenario that we're seeing in the wild probably is how do we take Azure Arc and extending the control plane to take advantage of a few things. One, security, compliance, and governance is probably the number one use case that we're seeing when it comes to Azure Arc enabled servers, right? Customers and partners, what they want to do basically is to take all the capabilities that they have in Azure and applies those capabilities into what they have deployed outside of Azure, right? So it's either servers or data assets or cloud native applications deployed in Kubernetes and whatnot. These are the things that we're seeing. And another big use case is migrations, right? Because as we are looking at Azure Arc and the fact that it does expand the control plane or extend the control plane, we basically want to look at how do we take the assets that are deployed outside of Azure and assess these assets should be projected as first-class citizens inside Azure, or should they be migrated? And partners with existing practices around migrations really should consider the Arc notion as a first step before a migration, if migration is not possible at first stage. So these are probably the top two. We have other use cases that we're going to talk about today.
Excellent. Thanks, Lior, for that. I'd like to change now to Matt. Matt, a question for you is, what is the most common use case for Azure Stack HCI? And is that more sort of edge or branch or data center modernization?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thanks. Hi, everyone. So my name is Matt McSpirit. I'm one of our customer and partner engineering folks, focused on working with customers and partners around our emerging and new technologies like Azure Stack HCI and AKS HCI. Now, when it comes to use cases, and is one more prevalent than the other, edge and data center, we're actually seeing both, and we're seeing a huge amount of interest across the board from an Azure Stack HCI perspective. So if you're an organization who's looking at providing a redundant branch solution, edge solution, where you're looking at smaller scale, but delivering a redundant, reliable, great value and great performance solution, Azure Stack HCI is delivering that. And then if you're looking in the data center, maybe you're looking to switch your virtualization platform at the end of a contract or update a legacy infrastructure. Again, Azure Stack HCI is a fantastic platform for that. And in both cases, the deep integration with Azure is what's setting it apart from alternatives in the industry there. So we're really excited about the interest and where it's going to go for our customers.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. And let's bring in our next speaker as well, DJ. DJ, when do you recommend Arc-enabled data services to customers?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone to Inspire. I'm DJ or Dhananjay Mahajan, and I am a program manager on the Arc-enabled data services team, working specifically with partners to make sure that we have great technology engagements. Chris, continuing from where Lior and Matt said, there is an overlap on where we think data services is all important too. As customers realize the cloud benefits, majority of our customers, close to 80 to 90%, depending on the survey you look at, are multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. So they want to run their application, get the benefits of the cloud, Yet they may have some constraints around compliance, security, governance, data gravity, which come into play. And that's where Azure Arc enabled data services can help in such situations. Customers who have workloads that reside outside of Azure or want to reside outside of Azure, either due to the data gravity. I'm working with a customer who is collecting a lot of data from their manufacturing. It's a manufacturing company, collecting data from all the manufacturing sites, analyzing it. They want to make quick decisions. And so data latency is important. Data gravity is important. They can't do a round trip to Azure, but in the long-term analysis, they want to use Azure. That's when Arc-enabled data services becomes important. The other areas I see is many customers are modernizing their apps. So while we have Arc-enabled SQL Server for those who have traditional applications, so SQL Server running in VMs, we have some customers who are slowly starting to migrate their data assets towards container-based architectures. And that's where containerized and PaaS-like experience can be delivered on any cloud. So they can take some of the Azure benefits and run them on their Kubernetes-based clusters, but they can also run these applications and take benefits of those services on any third-party cloud as well. And last but not the least, another area, Chris, where we are seeing a trend where data services is becoming common is some countries are putting in sovereignty laws, which require the customer to not move the data outside the country boundaries. And if there is no data center for Azure, this is where they're saying until the Azure data center is available within those boundaries, they can start using Azure Arc, run their analysis and run their applications on premises and still get some of the benefits of Azure. Those are the key areas where, Chris, we see data services being used in an Arc and hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environment.
Excellent. Thanks, DJ. And I see some other questions coming in for you. I'm going to come back to you in a moment. But Lior, bringing it back to you, actually, I really like this question, especially relevant, I think, for our partners. How does Azure Arc work with Azure Lighthouse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a question that we're obviously getting a lot, and especially when it comes to the managed service provider business, this is super relevant. And what I want to say is that the first thing to answer this question is to think about the challenge. Managed service providers that are using Lighthouse today, they have visibility to the Azure assets, right? And this is working great, and there's no problem with that. But the challenge here is that what happens when you have assets that are deployed outside of Azure? We're basically saying that this is money that is left on the table, because now that you have resources that are deployed outside of Azure that you can actually project as first-class citizens using Azure Arc, and it doesn't matter if it's a server resource, a Kubernetes cluster, a SQL managed instance using data services, it doesn't really matter. As long as this resource is projected as an Arc resource, now using Azure Lighthouse, these resources are becoming Azure resources for that matter. And by doing so, now the managed service provider is getting visibility and unlocking an whole set of assets that before Azure Arc, it didn't have any relations to. So again, going back to my previous comment around migration, this is another great way to assess what is happening outside of Azure and take formal decisions based on that. So that's really where Azure Lighthouse comes into place and really benefits when it comes to managed service providers.
Excellent. Thanks, Lior. And Lior, you brought up Kubernetes, so I'm going to point this one perhaps to Matt. So what support does Azure Stack HCI have for running Kubernetes?
Yeah, fantastic support straight off the bat. So as we know, Azure Stack HCI is a brilliant platform for running traditional workloads in virtual machines, Windows, Linux, and your apps within. Excellent platform for that. But we also want to make sure it's the best platform to run the next generation of applications that you're thinking about building and running, or you're building with your customers. And we want to make Kubernetes as accessible to you and your customers as we possibly can. Now, Kubernetes is hard, especially if you've tried to build it yourself from the open source components. So why not benefit from our learnings, our experience running a hyperscale Kubernetes solution, AKS? We'll package it all up for you in an easy to consume, easy to deploy, easy to manage experience that we call AKS on Azure Stack HCI. So take that, deploy on top of Azure Stack HCI, and you then have a right-sized, high-performance, reliable, redundant, scalable Kubernetes solution to consume on premises. And it's very IT pro friendly, and it's very developer friendly. So you've got both audiences that you can engage with your respective customers. And it's got those great links into Azure through Azure Arc as well for that scaled management and governance. So it's an awesome solution.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. I like that. Plenty of questions coming in too, which is good. Thank you. DJ, back to you. Can I run Azure Arc enabled data services outside of Azure on other clouds?
Absolutely. While, as Matt said, Azure Stack AKS HCI running on Azure Stack HCI is the best Kubernetes to run Arc enabled data services on and Arc on. We know and we understand that customers have other clouds that they're using. So as long as it's a CNCF conformant Kubernetes, Arc-enabled data services or other services, as well as Arc-enabled Kubernetes, can run on any of those Kubernetes and manage them with a centralized management plane and get all the benefits that you have on any Kubernetes. While we've made it easier to configure and run it on AKS HCI, it should run on any conformant Kubernetes. Now, one more thing to keep in mind is we are also working with some of the industry leaders in the enterprise, such as Red Hat, Dell, and other partners to come in who have Kubernetes distros, and even if they're on premises, Arc can run with those distributions, as well as in third-party clouds like AWS and Google Cloud, which is running Kubernetes. It should be possible to run the Arc services on top of that.
Excellent. Thanks, DJ. Lior, back to you this time. Where is the best place for me to get started with Azure Arc? I need to learn about it. I need to be able to, come up with these great solutions. So how do I do that?
Yeah. So to answer that question, the first thing that I want to mention is that, we have a great set of documentations when it comes to the Azure platform, right? We're documenting everything that we do. We want to make sure that when we're releasing a product, we're also releasing a quality set of documents. Azure Arc is very unique because it touches, by definition, everything that is deployed outside of Azure. And because of that, we created a project called the Azure Arc Jumpstart Project. The Azure Arc Jumpstart Project is basically a set of what we call scenarios. These scenarios split into two. The bootstrap scenarios will show you in an automated fashion, in a very detailed fashion, how to get going with building up an infrastructure. Whether that infrastructure is in AWS, Google Cloud Platform, VMware, or whatever it is that you have going on, these are the bootstrap scenarios. Now, after you're done building this environment, then we also have automated scenarios, which we call unified operation scenarios, or if you may, day two scenarios. Now, these scenarios are actually the ones that are focusing on the real value proposition, because once you're bootstrapping the environment, what is it that you can actually do with that? And this is where the unified operation scenarios will come into place. So things like Azure Monitor, SQL Backup, Log Analytics, Sentinel, and whatnot. These are the scenarios that we are covering. We also have scenarios that are focusing on developers, right, and cloud native applications like GitOps configurations and Service Mesh. So the Jumpstart project really capture all of these scenarios and bringing those to you. So today we have more than 80 scenarios, again, in an automated fashion to provide to our customers and our partners. Now, another product that is part of the Jumpstart project is what we call ArcBox. Now, if the scenarios are more kind of a supermarket experience that you can just pick and choose whatever scenario that you want to do, ArcBox is very opinionated deployment, meaning that we're going to deploy everything for you. You don't have to select everything. All you need to do is just enter a bunch of parameters, and everything will be deployed inside your Azure subscription. So you don't even have to have like an AWS environment or a GCP account or even a vSphere environment to simulate on-premises deployment, because what we want is for you to have an environment that you can just tear down anytime you want. And this is ArcBox, and a lot of these details are documented inside the Jumpstart project. And the third thing that I will mention with regards to the Jumpstart project is our YouTube channels, where you can see those scenarios that I mentioned, but only in a very snackable recording fashion. Because if you don't have the time to do the scenarios yourself and you just want to see the end result, this is where the YouTube channel will come into place. So Chris, this is probably the best way for you to get going with Azure Arc, the Azure Arc Jumpstart project.
Love that. Thank you very much, Leo. That's a great resource then for us to benefit from. Matt, got a gnarly question for you, I think. When should I recommend Azure Stack HCI and when do I recommend Windows Server?
Yeah, that is pretty gnarly. Thanks for that, Chris. I think I've been singled out there. No, so it's a common question we get from customers and from partners alike, because Windows Server has this very established heritage in the infrastructure space. It's very popular and well utilized to provide a broad selection of services within enterprise environments. And both are going to continue to exist and gain innovation as we go forward. But the best way to think about it is, if you're thinking about the infrastructure, what sits on the metal, what's going to run your VMs, what's going to power your software-defined storage and software-defined networking, Azure Stack HCI is the future of that. Azure Stack HCI 20H2 today, 21H2 later in the year, and on from there, this subscription-based hybrid solution that we've brought on premises for you to run those virtualized and containerized workloads. And all of our investments in that virtualization, storage, networking, and that goodness, that hyper-converged goodness, is going to go into Azure Stack HCI. But Windows Server as a guest is still incredibly important, whether it's benefiting you from the perspective of providing roles and services like the traditional domain services, application services, and the many other services within Windows Server that customers use, or whether it's as a platform to run your line of business or ISV-based applications. That's where Windows Server has still got an incredible part to play. And even as a container host as well, as we see more and more organizations containerizing Windows apps. So the two will definitely coexist. But if you think on the metal infrastructure, Azure Stack HCI. If you think in guest, very much a Windows Server preference in that. Hope that helps to qualify a little bit.
No, it does. That's great. Thanks, Matt. And I don't want to save all the hard questions just for Matt. So DJ, how do I think about SQL Server, traditional SQL Server, and can I manage that with Arc? And how do I compare that with Azure Data Services?
Absolutely, Chris. It's actually easy. As I mentioned in the previous question, I just touched upon it. If you're going to a customer, or a customer has traditional SQL Server, which is running on either Linux or Windows in a virtualized environment or physical environment, Arc still has it covered. And this is the differentiator we have from our hybrid multi-cloud platform with Arc. Using Arc-enabled SQL Server, which is going to be GA at the end of this month, you can deploy Arc-enabled SQL Server on those agents, on those machines, on those servers, which are running SQL Server, and start managing those existing SQL servers from a central management plane of the Azure portal. Not only that, but you will also get some of the benefits of the Azure-based services like threat analytics, the report on making sure that you have the latest security and patches. You should be able to do SQL assessment services, which used to cost our customers. Now that is available for free. And most importantly, a new billing model that's a cloud-based billing model comes to you. So if you have Arc-enabled SQL Server, then you should be able to manage all those SQL servers that are running on Windows Server, Linux Server in virtualized or physical environments.
Got it. Great. Thanks, DJ. I'm going to come back to you, Matt, for the next question. Is Azure Stack HCI an integrated system?
So that is a good question. So we in our catalog, our Azure Stack HCI hardware catalog, we have two, let's call them classifications of hardware. We have what we call the validated nodes, and this is a selection of our hardware from our great OEM partners that tick a number of the boxes that we require for Azure Stack HCI to function properly. And like I say, the catalog is vast and supports a number of these different offerings. And you may already have hardware in your environment that actually meets that classification already, which is great. You could just go ahead and install Azure Stack HCI from that standpoint. But then we have this classification as that we call an integrated system, and that's a higher level of integration between Microsoft and the OEM, not just from a technical perspective, but also from a supportability perspective, with things like single support ticket routing through between the OEMs and Microsoft to give a more streamlined experience. Some enhancements around security from a technical perspective as well, some enhancements we're working on there. So there's definitely a variation between what we call a validated node and an integrated system, and both of them are on our Azure Stack HCI catalog, which you can easily find online as well.
Excellent, thanks, Matt. I'm going to come back to you, Lior, for this next question. Do we have hybrid advanced specialization available in this space?
Yeah, as of last month, we do. So actually, we have a couple of advanced specializations with regards to hybrid. The first one is advanced specialization that is focusing on Azure Arc, right? And we're going to publish all the details around that in the chat and later on for this session. But basically, this advanced specialization is targeting all the partners that wants to build and augment their current solutions with Azure Arc. So as we mentioned, we're seeing use cases that are super valid to practices that partners already have today, right? Migration, security and compliance, data modernization, cloud native application modernization and whatnot. And these scenarios are the ones that are just super easy to augment with Azure Arc. So the advanced specialization really touches on that. And it covers all the Azure Arc pillars as of today. So Azure Arc enabled servers, data services, and Kubernetes. Now, the second advanced specialization we have is how do we actually approach HCI, right? So that advanced specialization is focusing on that pillar. And what we want to make sure is that partners are also looking at HCI as the go-to platform when it comes to their practices, right? So really the advanced specialization for HCI is designed exactly for that. So these are the advanced specialization that we currently have around the hybrid space for Azure Arc and HCI, Chris.
Thanks, Leo. Appreciate that. DJ, question for you. Can you explain the low latency scenarios you're seeing with customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we were saying earlier, Chris, there are many use cases where data services has become important for customers to run close to where their data resides. I'm talking about one of the customers I work with, SKF. SKF is a global leader in provider of lubricants and ball bearings worldwide. And they were collecting this data from literally thousands of different sensors that are managing their factory floor. They wanted to go from a very manual, reactive management of their factories, their factory machinery, to a data-driven factory, a modern digital factory. And the way they're doing this is they want to collect all this data and they want to make quick decisions on the spot so that every factory, each one of their factories, whether it's connected all the time to Azure or the cloud or connected only periodically, should be able to make these decisions reliably. And in order to do that, it was important for them to not make the round trip of the data, because while some of the factories may be based in regions around the world which have great connectivity, there are factories in remote locations which do not have that kind of connections, high bandwidth connections. So the latency would have been uncompromisable if they had to do a round trip, do the data analytics in the cloud. That's where Azure Arc came in, where they could bring in some of the services, whether it's SQL managed instance, Postgres hyperscale, and in future other Azure-based Azure Data Services that they would like to run on premises. And as the data is being collected, they can analyze the data, do analysis, make decisions based on that analysis, and then push that data over to the cloud when connectivity is available. So making those quick decisions, having compute available closer to where the data is, made it possible for them to really automate their factories based on the data they were collecting. And that's where Matt's AKS HCI came into play, where AKS HCI provided a redundant, highly available 3-node cluster, physical cluster on which Kubernetes was running and data services was running on top of it. And that's where their applications were able to make quick decisions based on the data that was available locally. So that's how data latency, as an example, as a practical example, came into play.
Excellent. Thanks, DJ. Lior, back to you, sir. Is Azure Arc only for enterprises?
Certainly not. Azure Arc is really about taking everything that you have outside of Azure and bring that to Azure. We have no differentiation between an enterprise customer or an enterprise-focused partner than an ISV or a managed service provider or SMC or small business that we wanna help using Azure Arc. So it's definitely not just for enterprise customers. I will say that for enterprise customers, Azure Arc is very appealing because of their mature practices around these use cases that I was referring to before, which is security, compliance, governance, all this stuff, because enterprise customers are really focusing on this type of stuff, right? But having said that, if you're thinking about a situation where you have an ISV that really wants to take their solution and bring it to the marketplace, but also the solution is built using other infrastructure providers or other cloud providers like AWS or GCP or something on premises, right, like Hyper-V or VMware, these ISVs, right, sometimes are encountering the challenge of multiple cloud providers that have different sets of tools, right? So these ISVs now can use Azure Arc in order to have greater visibility and really get all the details that they need in a single platform, which is being done using Azure Arc. So the net of it is that no, it's definitely not just for the enterprise. Enterprise does have great use cases, but really Azure Arc can benefit to any customer from the smallest to the largest. So yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Lior. Matt, going to come back to you, sir. If I have a Windows Server background, what do I need to learn about Azure to use Azure Stack HCI?
Oof, that's a good one. So what do you need to learn about Azure? Well, I think firstly I'll start from the deployment and the management of Azure Stack HCI first before we move into Azure, because a lot of those skills that you've got in the Windows Server space are going to be instantly usable, especially experiences around PowerShell. If you've used the Windows Admin Center, those are going to be incredibly valuable in getting started with Azure Stack HCI. Once you've deployed and you register with Azure, you're then into an integration point at which you can learn as you go if that's something that's if Azure is completely new to you. So I don't think any necessary initial experience is required. We don't make that assumption. But that said, once you've registered, you can start to light up the services to integrate with Azure Stack HCI as you go and as you become more comfortable. And that could be monitoring. So learning about Azure Monitor, that would be very valuable. I think learning more about the benefits of things like Security Center. I know Lior touched on things like Sentinel before as well. Site recovery and backup come into play as well, especially if you're looking at how you provide DR for your Azure Stack HCI environments on-prem. All of those can be a journey that you go on as with Azure Stack HCI as your starting point. And we're going to be lighting up more and more capabilities in that Azure experience for Azure Stack HCI. Things like VM self-service is a big one. I want to deploy a VM in an Azure-like experience, but it needs to run on premises, whether that's for network latency, data sovereignty, etc., like Dhananjay was talking about. Those are the experiences we're lighting up, and we have a preview program for Azure Stack HCI where you can get involved and test some of these different aspects early as well. So lots going on.
Thanks, Matt. We are very, very close to time, so I'm going to ask for one last question, Lior, and it's going to go to you. We have a large investment in our existing management tools. Do we have to replace them?
Certainly not. When it comes to the existing management tools that you have, Azure Arc, and really, if you're thinking about Azure as a whole, was designed to not be destructive, meaning that Azure was designed with hybrid notion at the first place, right? We started with the Stack family years ago, and then we graduated into what we have today, right? And Azure Arc is really a centerpiece as part of that hybrid story. Now, when it comes to the existing management tools, really what we want to be is non-destructive, because we understand that in order for you to project those resources or deploy data assets or app assets outside of Azure, you don't want to use different tools just because now it's being projected as an Azure resource. So Azure Arc really gives you that flexibility of doing a graduational basically adjustments to your practices, meaning that you can start with whatever it is that you have, right? And if you look at that from an IT admin perspective, just as an example, right? The IT admins are really in the center of all of this because they need to deal with making sure that the environment is up and running and the lights are always on. But with Azure Arc, now that the fact that those resources are deployed to Azure or projected to Azure, now they can get used to different tools that are basically native Azure management capabilities. But we are not saying go and do a rip and replace for your management assets on premises or in other clouds. On the contrary, we don't want to be disruptive.
Excellent. Well, I'm afraid we are out of time. I want to thank Matt and DJ and Lior for being our experts for this call. I want to thank all of you for the great questions you've been submitting. I hope this has been valuable to you. We really appreciate hearing from you. Please be sure to rate the session and check out the hybrid portal on azure.com if you want more information. But with that, just thanks everybody, and have a great Inspire.